The NFL Combine is complete. We are officially one step closer to the 2025 NFL Draft. Now we've seen how athletic a lot of these guys are, gotten a lot more information as far as where they might be going. So let's go ahead and dive into a two-round 2025 NFL mock draft here. Let's just go ahead and get right into the picks, because we've got a lot of them here today. We're going to try to roll through the first round relatively quickly, since a lot of these guys you've heard of before, but definitely going to try to explain some of the fits, why some guys are shooting up the board and things like that. So starting at number one with the Tennessee Titans, there's rumors that the Giants and the Titans are in, deep discussions to trade that number one overall pick, and I definitely think there's a very real world where that happens. I have done it in the past, but in this video, we're just going to go no trades, the straight draft order. So we're going to go ahead and go with Abdul Carter out of Penn State. He didn't test due to an injury that was uncovered at the Combine, but he's definitely, one of the most explosive, dynamic edge rushers. I think him and Travis Hunter are going to be the consensus top two players when it comes to pure talent in this draft, along with maybe Ashton Genty. So I think Carter makes sense. It's a huge position of need for the Titans, and I definitely think you can make the case that he's the best player in this class. Then at number two for the Browns, one of the big reports coming out of the Combine is that they are all in on a quarterback. They've been posting a lot about Shemar Sanders, but there's rumors across the league that Cam Ward is kind of far and away the quarterback one in this class for almost every team. And I believe that's going to be the case. That's the case for me as well. I think he's a clear step above everyone else in this class. And for the Browns, you can't keep continuing to rely on Deshaun Watson. Whether it's money, injuries, or just how poorly he's played on the field, he has not lived up to what they were hoping when they made that trade. And I think they get a fresh start here with Cam Ward at number two. For the Giants here, this is very interesting because you could make the pick and take Shemar Sanders to be your potential quarterback in the future. But I also think that Joe Shane and Brian Daboll have very short leashes this year. There were rumors that, they were going to be really interested in Matthew Stafford. That ended up not happening, but I think, they could definitely be interested in guys like Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins, Justin Fields, something in the veteran quarterback market that can potentially help them win now because their jobs are at stake. And with that being the case, there's rumors that Shemar Sanders might not be a consensus, top three pick like the media has been hyping him up to be, at least when it comes to team opinions of that. So I'm going to go with Travis Hunter here. Pair him, if he ends up playing corner, that's huge. You get kind of a number one corner that you've desperately been missing on the back end of that defense. And then you also get a guy that you can pair with Malik Neighbors and have just a really dynamic receiving room. I do believe Hunter is going to play at least in some capacity both ways. So I think that would be a very fun dynamic duo. And this is very much, with the preface that they do get one of those veteran quarterback options. At number four up next, we have the New England Patriots. And this is going to be my first big surprise of the draft. I am not going to go with Will Campbell or Tetairoa McMillan or one of those guys. I'm going to go with an offensive lineman, but a guy who made himself a lot of money this weekend. Armand Membu out of Missouri. He's a guy who had a ridiculously fast 40 time. He was just really great all across the board when you look at his combine performance. You look at his 40-yard dash. He was the second fastest at a 4.91. His vertical jump was excellent, a 34-inch vertical jump. He was just one of those guys who really looked incredibly athletic. He did really good in the testing, and I think he does match the thresholds that a lot of teams are going to look for, that he could potentially stick out at tackle. He played right tackle for Missouri. I do think there's a pretty decent chance that he ends up going over Will Campbell because the perception that Campbell can't stick at tackle. And we're going to talk about that in a second because I actually have the Jaguars going with Will Campbell at number 5 here. And this is a pick that, I think you could absolutely argue it's not going to happen. But I've picked Mason Graham there before. I've picked the corners there before. And Campbell is going to be an interesting case because he was incredibly athletic, ran a sub-5 40-yard dash, was really athletic on the field drills at the Combine. The big problem, though, he didn't hit the 33-inch arm length. That's kind of considered the bare minimum for being a tackle in the NFL. There are exceptions to that. Braden Smith is kind of the best one that comes to mind, and I still believe with his athleticism and some of his movement ability that Will Campbell absolutely can be a tackle. But with the Jaguars here, he doesn't have to be. I mean, he can. Walker Little's there. You have other guys, Anton Harrison on the other side, but they need help on the interior, both at guard and potentially center, and I think Campbell could be absolutely excellent on the interior as well. I would still try him at tackle, but I think, he just gives you a ton of flexibility to figure out your 5 best guys. I don't know. I don't think Jaguars fans are probably going to love that pick, but that's what I went with here. At number 6 for the Raiders, I'm going to go with Shedeur Sanders. There have been some mock drafts that have come out that, people were a little bit more connected at the combine, thought that Sanders really could fall much further than this. But I think for the Raiders, Pete Carroll, Chip Kelly, they're going to want somebody other than Aiden O'Connell to lead this offense. And Sanders is a very polarizing quarterback prospect. I do think he has a limited ceiling, but he is somebody that can operate an offense effectively. And I do think that, at this point, the Raiders have continuously been searching for their quarterback of the future. And they think they might have that in Shedeur Sanders here at number 6. For the Jets at number 7, going to go with Mason Graham out of Michigan. He definitely didn't light up the measurable tests. He weighed in, 25 pounds almost lighter than he was listed at Michigan. Has really short arms, which I think was all very well known. I don't think he was playing that big, and his lack of length showed up. But even despite that, he's such a good run stuffer. He has great instincts. He really is dynamic using those hands, swiping guys out of his chest. I think that people are going to overthink Mason Graham and how good he is. The Jets, I do think, pair him with Quinnen Williams and have an electric front line there with number 7. Moving to number 8, another guy who absolutely boosted his stock at the combine and is going to, I think, very clearly go in the top 10. That's Shemar Stewart out of Texas A&M. This dude just moved different at the combine and, has put on a display at the Senior Bowl. He's had a great offseason. He had a 4.59 40-yard dash, which was, one of the best in the entire group. He had a 40-inch vertical, a ridiculous 10-foot, 11-inch broad jump, which was the best in the defensive line group as well. You can see the explosiveness, the speed, the power is on tape. Somebody's going to fall in love with Shemar Stewart and pick him really, really high. Even though there is a major lack of production, he's pretty much hit all of the things that teams look for when it comes to athleticism and potential development and superstar potential, that he is definitely going to go high. And for the Panthers at number 8, that gives them a chance to bolster the pass rush that was really, really bad for this team last year. So I think that pick does make some sense. Then at number 9, we are going to go with Tyler Warren out of Penn State. Didn't test at the combine, but I think he is very likely going to be the first tight end off the board and somebody who's just seen as this dynamic playmaker. The Saints don't really have that guy over the middle of the field that can really win consistently. And so I think Warren absolutely makes sense. He's that contested catch, run after catch type of weapon in the middle of the field. I think Warren could absolutely warrant a top 10 pick. Next up for the Chicago Bears at number 10, I do think there's a world in which this happens, though it's not necessarily going to be a popular pick, I think, among Bears fans. I'm going to go with Ashton Jeanty out of Boise State. Ben Johnson loved running the football in Detroit. Jeanty just has ridiculous contact balance. He didn't go at the combine. He didn't do a lot of, tests or anything like that, but he is a dynamic running back and somebody that I think the Bears will really like. And I think he's going to go higher than people expect because, it's kind of hard to find a place for him, but his talent is one of the best in this entire class, and I don't think he's going to fall too far. Right here, the Bears snatch him up and add him to a running back room that, wasn't great last year, and he can be that true bell cow back. Then up next for the San Francisco 49ers, I've had them going offensive line quite a few times, defensive line, but I am going to go in a slightly different direction and take Jahdae Barron out of Texas. His really only question mark was his athleticism. Ran a 4.39 40-yard dash. He pretty much put all of those concerns to bed. Apparently, he was one of the best interviews in the entire class. I absolutely think Jahdae Barron is going to be the second corner off the board. We're seeing one of the other, presumed top talents in this draft, Will Johnson, kind of consistently be pushed down a lot of draft boards and mock drafts. And I think there is reason for it. There's concerns about his long speed and, his injuries this year, that kind of stuff. I think Barron is going to be the second corner off the board, and he goes to the 49ers here at 11. Then for the Cowboys, no Ashton Jeanty on the board. We are going to go with another playmaker, though, and take Tetairoa McMillan. I do think the wide receivers might fall down this draft a little bit, but McMillan is a big guy. He didn't test at the combine. I'll be curious to see if he runs at the pro day. I don't think he's going to run super fantastically well, but adding him to a room with CeeDee Lamb, really getting this passing offense back going with Dak Prescott healthy this year, I think is priority number 1. So adding another true playmaker like McMillan absolutely can be a big help to that. And then at number 13 for the Dolphins, I'm going to take an offensive lineman. Apparently, they're presuming that Teron Armstead is not going to be good to go this year. So I'm going to go with Kelvin Banks out of Texas. There are people that have soured on him, and I will provide. Next video is going to be offensive tackle rankings. I'll provide my thoughts on Kelvin Banks, but I think there's very likely going to be a scenario where he plays at left tackle, can slide into guard if necessary, and the Dolphins and this team definitely need to upgrade the offensive line. So I'm going to go with Banks at number 13 here. Then at number 14 for the Indianapolis Colts, maybe the biggest winner of the entire NFL Combine, I'm going to go with safety. It's not Malachi Starks, not Xavier Watts, Nick Emmanwori out of South Carolina. He's somebody that just showed out at the Combine. His athleticism, ran under a 4.4, had ridiculous jumps. He looked incredibly smooth and athletic. You would turn on the tape, he's a big physical guy, can come up and stuff running backs in the box. He can man cover tight ends. He's a really talented player, and I think this Combine performance just put a lot of eyes on him, and people are going back and watching the tape and are really impressed with his game. I do think he's going to be at least a first-round pick. We'll see how high he climbs, but I think there's a good chance he's the first safety off the board, and the Colts make that selection at number 14. Next up at 15 for the Atlanta Falcons, pass rush, pass rush, pass rush. I don't know if I've taken somebody that's not a pass rusher yet for them in my mock drafts, and that's going to continue to be the case. I'm going to go with Mike Green out of Marshall, put up a ton of bench reps, did have shorter arms. There was very much character, concerns that came out about him, but there were definitely things that, are big time question marks. We'll see how that affects him, but Mike Green out of Marshall, I think he is going to be somebody that is really intriguing. He brings a lot of bend and burst off the edge, pairs it with some really good pass rushing moves. So it's exactly what the Falcons need. As long as they're comfortable with the character, I think that could be a really good selection for them. Then at number 16, definitely thought about a couple of guys here. Going to go with Jalen Walker out of Georgia. This is a popular pick for me. I just think he fits their defense really well. Jonathan Gannon can get really creative on how to use him as an off-ball linebacker, as a edge rusher. He doesn't have the presumed length to be a true edge rusher, but I think Baron Browning is another guy who came into the NFL as an off-ball linebacker, transitioned to edge. That's somebody that Arizona prioritized in a trade, so I think Jalen Walker is a similar mold that they could really like. Then at number 17 for the Cincinnati Bengals, considered defensive line, offensive line, but ultimately I thought Will Johnson was really hard to pass up in this spot. He's a guy who he definitely can play press man, but he's really good in zone. They do have some Michigan corners in this room already. Dax Hill, DJ Turner. You also have Cam Taylor-Britt, but I think getting, really good cover guys for Al Golden, who is going to be their first-time defensive coordinator, is going to be, a big-time priority for this team. And for a guy like Will Johnson, who maybe didn't have a great year this past year, but has some really good tape on film, I think is somebody that they could take advantage of and get a really good value here at number 17. Then at number 18, a guy who also looked great at the Combine, Jahad Campbell for the Seattle Seahawks here. Usually I take offensive line, but, I think that the value right now could potentially be in Jahad Campbell, who is another guy, a lot like Jalen Walker, who's kind of that hybrid off-ball, on-ball type of linebacker. He was more of that off-ball, true middle linebacker type, which is a need for the Seahawks, but he also provides pass rushing versatility, which is another need for the Seahawks. So I think they could get creative with him. There's some decent depth on the interior of this offensive line class, so I think the Combine showed a lot of guys that maybe we weren't quite as high on, so maybe they target that in round 2 or sometime on day 2 or later in the draft and get Campbell, who I think could be a true playmaker. At number 19 for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, going to go with an edge rusher, Michael Williams out of Georgia. He is a guy who is a physical freak. He did not test at the Combine, but I definitely think his length and athleticism are really going to intrigue a lot of teams. I think that, there's a very good chance that he goes higher than this, even though he's not super well developed. I'm very interested to see how the NFL views him because I think, had he tested, he would have done really, really well. So very curious on Michael Williams, where he'll go, but I have him going at number 19 to the Buccaneers. And then at number 20, I've had Ashton Genty here before. Supposedly, Sean Payton wants that joker, that playmaker, that, dynamic guy with the ball in his hand. Somebody who tested ridiculously well, and I think, could be that guy, is a running back, Omarion Hampton, out of North Carolina. I don't believe I've mocked Hampton to the Broncos before, but I absolutely don't mind it one bit. He ran incredibly well for how big he is. You look at his 40-yard dash time, it was one of the best in the group among a really, really strong group. A 4.46 40-yard dash for him is excellent at his size. He, looks like a physical freak, has amazing contact balance. He's, incredibly productive as well. Hampton could be that type of guy to unlock their running game and really be that true run after catch, yards after contact type of player that Peyton is looking for. At number 21, another guy who is a huge winner of the combine. It's going to be wide receiver Matthew Golden out of Texas, somebody who had 4.29 speed, absolutely blazing. That was a big surprise. A lot of people thought it was going to be another Texas player, Isaiah Bond, but Golden's the one who got that sub 4.3 time, and he looked very smooth, very fast, very athletic. He had a great year at Texas and somebody that I'm pretty sure with that time is going to most certainly go in the first round. And for the Steelers, that makes a lot of sense. You've got to get more dynamic. Regardless of who your quarterback is next year, I'm going to go with Golden here as another playmaker for them. Next up for the Chargers, taken running backs for them many times before, but now with Hampton and Genty off the board, I'm going to pivot and go ahead and take another guy who I think is usually mocked to them. That's Colston Loveland out of Michigan. I think that, Harbaugh reuniting with one of his former players that was incredibly productive for him 2 years ago at Michigan makes a lot of sense. You get another weapon for Justin Herbert over the middle of the field who's a great route runner, creates really good separation, and is a mismatch for linebackers, safeties, all of them. I think that makes a ton of sense for this Chargers team. And then for the Packers at number 23, I think they need to get a true number one wide receiver. Jaden Reed was decent this year, but most of the other guys were either dealing with injuries, drops. They just weren't very good this past year. And I think that stunted Jordan Love's, second year development as a true starter. I'm going to go with Luther Burden out of Missouri. He ran really well for his size. He's a great yards after catch weapon. He's somebody who has good explosiveness. I think that you can get a really good player in Luther Burden that fits what this offense needs and potentially being that number one type wide receiver. And number 24 for the Vikings, I'm going to go with Kenneth Grant out of Michigan. He's very athletic for how big he is. This, Vikings team definitely needed to get tougher up in the middle of that defense in the interior. Grant's a guy who does have some pass rushing upside. For as big as he is, that's really intriguing. And I can definitely see this Vikings team wanting to get tougher in the trenches, and Grant is a great way to do that. I definitely like him here at number 24 for the Vikings. Then at number 25 for the Texans, going to go with another guy who's had a great draft cycle here so far. That's Gray Zabel out of North Dakota State. Showed out at the Senior Bowl, was kind of the standout player there. He had looked really smooth and good at the combine as well, so I think this Texans team, you have to protect C.J. Stroud. Yes, you can look at wide receiver and some of the other guys that are there, but I think getting Gray Zabel to be able to plug into the interior, protect C.J. Stroud, that needs to be priority number one, and I think it is. And so I'm going to go with Zabel at number 25. And then at number 26 for the Rams, they just signed Alaric Jackson to a deal, but I still think that having seen on the right side and, some of the interior guys, the offensive line is still definitely in shuffle, and I'm going to go with Josh Simmons out of Ohio State. He's somebody that I think, barring that injury, would have gone much higher than this. And even if it's kind of, you're not sure exactly where he'll fit in, maybe it is right tackle in the future, maybe he does kick into guard, I think he can be really good. I really like his athleticism, his movement ability. He does have natural tackle length as well. He's not, incredibly long, but he does have good enough measurables to stick out at tackle. So I think you take a really talented player in Simmons and kind of figure out what fits best. And you do have to find a guy that can fit the scheme. And Simmons, I do think, fits Sean McVay's scheme pretty well. So that's going to be the Rams at number 26. And then at the Ravens up next, going to go with Malachi Starks. The Ravens are always so good at taking advantage of really talented players that fall due to, position concerns or whatever it is. Malachi Starks is a guy who had a fine combine, but he didn't blow anyone out of the water like a guy like Nick Emmanwori. So I think there's definitely a chance where he's going to slide down the board a little bit. Had a little bit of an up and down 2024 season as well. So there's some inconsistencies matched with maybe not absolutely elite athleticism, and I think that's going to push him down the board, whether that's warranted or not. Then at number 28 for the Detroit Lions, I think they need help on the interior of the offensive line. Tyler Booker is a guy who did not test well, but you have to have expected that based on his tape. He's not an athletic dude, but he's a mauler. He's the kind of guy who will go in and, as he put it, take the love of football away from his opponents. And I think that's exactly the type of mentality that Dan Campbell and the Lions tend to look for. The interior of that offensive line has gotten a little bit thin, old, and injury prone, so getting a guy like Booker makes a lot of sense for them at 28. Then the Commanders up at number 29, going to go with a pass rusher. James Pierce Jr. is an interesting one because he ran ridiculously fast in the 40, didn't have a great vertical, or his jumps weren't overly impressive. Very curious to see where the NFL lands on him. It's also very interesting to see about their perceived character concerns around him. There's not really a whole lot of specifics, but there are quite a few reports that are saying that teams have concerns about his character, that Tennessee was, ready to move on from him and are glad that he left. So it's very hard to say. That could be completely made up. Who knows? But, James Pierce, I think, could have a very wide range of outcomes. But for me, have him going number 29 to the Commanders here. Then the Bills at number 30, I'm going to go with Walter Nolan, another guy who has perceived character concerns. And it's not super specific, but it's just, supposedly teams have taken him off of their board. So he's another guy who could fall much further in the draft. Or he could go, pick number 8 or whatever it is. He's an incredibly talented player. It's hard to kind of know where he might end up. For the Bills, they need to get tougher on the interior. He was great at stopping the run. He's an underdeveloped pass rusher, but he's somebody that has a ton of tools in that area as well. And I think Nolan could be a really exciting pairing with Ed Oliver on the interior there. Then at number 31 for the Chiefs, I've taken tackle for them many, many times. Going to continue to do it. I'm going to take Josh Connerly out of Oregon. I think it's really good value. He moved incredibly smoothly in a lot of the offensive tackle drills. He looked very athletic amongst a lot of other really athletic offensive linemen. I think Connerly is going to be somebody that's hard to keep out of the first round because of a lot of his traits, but there's only 32 picks, so we'll kind of see what happens. And then the Eagles at number 32, I think that Donovan Ezeruaku could be the pick for them out of Boston College. He's a little bit of a shorter end, but he has really long arms. He has really good agility as well. Good bag of pass rush moves. Was the only one to run a sub 7 second 3-cone drill for defensive ends. So he's really athletic, has good agility, has length, even if he is a shorter guy. He was very productive. Definitely could see Ezeruaku sneaking into the back end of round 1, and I think the Eagles do make sense as a location for him as well. Moving into round 2, we have the Cleveland Browns on the clock at number 33. We have them taking Cam Ward with the second overall pick. I'm going to go with a pass protector for Cam Ward. Ariante Ursary out of Minnesota looked ridiculously athletic for his size. It was really, really impressive to see. He had a 5.01 40-yard dash, moved pretty smoothly, looked very athletic for how big he is. Getting him to be that blindside pass protector on the left side. Jedrick Wills seems like, the Browns are kind of moving past him, and the offensive line needs to get younger and more talented. I think Ursary at the top of the second round would be a fantastic pick for them. Then at number 34 for the New York Giants, we had them taking Travis Hunter at, third overall rather than taking a quarterback. I'm going to go ahead and do it now, though. I'm going to have them, sign somebody like Aaron Rodgers and then get a Jackson Dart as a developmental second-round pick. I think there's definitely a world where he sneaks into the very back end of round 1. Maybe a team like the Giants or another one of these teams at the top of the second round decide to, trade up and get that 5th-year option. But Dart's an intriguing player. I'm not overly high on him because I do think that there's a big-time adjustment with the kind of offense that he ran at Ole Miss. There was a lot of one read and throw type things that a lot of predetermined reads, but he does have the arm strength. I think the accuracy there is there at times as well. So he's a very interesting developmental type guy. If he can sit behind somebody like Aaron Rodgers, I wouldn't mind kind of this plan for the Giants at all. Next up for the Titans at number 35. Again, it's one of those situations where we'll see what the quarterbacks look like, but for the sake of this mock draft, we had them taking Abdul Carter. I'm going to go with Emeka Egbuka out of Ohio State now. He's a guy who just makes all of the tough catches over the middle of the field, does a lot of the dirty work. He's just really, kind of that pros pro that exactly what you're going to get from him. I think he's a poor man's Amon-Ra St. Brown. That's the comp that gets thrown out on him a lot. I don't think he's that good, but I think, he does a lot of the same things well. He's just super reliable, has great hands, willing blocker. I think that's the kind of thing that the Titans need to get into that wide receiver room that lacks a lot of talent right now. Then at 36 for the Jacksonville Jaguars, we had them taking Will Campbell at the top of the draft. I'm going to go with a guy who absolutely earned himself some money at Maxwell Hairston out of Kentucky. He was freaky athletic, ran a ridiculously fast 40-yard dash. I think that he's a guy that's definitely going to be very sought after. Corners, 40-yard dash time is something that really can matter. And Hairston, I think him having that in his tool belt is going to make him likely a high second-round pick, maybe even sneaks into the first round, but I think he is definitely going to go high in this draft, and the Jaguars take him at number 36 here. Next up, the Raiders at 37. We had them taking Shedeur Sanders. I do think they're going to want to establish the run as well. You have Brock Bowers that he can throw to. You have Jacoby Myers. There's some weapons there. They were terrible running the ball last year. And a guy who I think really helped himself again is Quinshon Judkins out of Ohio State. A lot of people thought I was crazy for having Judkins over Caleb Johnson and Travion Henderson as teammates. I think, that was a very unpopular opinion for a long time. Those definitely weren't final rankings that I did a few months ago in my top 10 running backs videos, and it's, bound to potentially change, but I think Judkins ran incredibly well, sub 4.5 time for how big he is. I think, that showed up on tape to me. I think people just saw the one play where he had the huge burst. I think it was against Texas or Notre Dame, I can't remember, in the college football playoffs, and he ended up running out of gas and got caught from behind, and people just assumed he was slower than dirt. And that's just not the case. He's an athletic guy. He can absolutely hit the hole with some burst. He's tough to bring down. I think Judkins is going to be a second-round pick. Curious to see, if he's RB3 or RB6 or 7, but I think, there's going to be a lot of running backs that go in round 2 because that is where the talent is. And number 38 for the Patriots, going to go with a guy who I was really, really pleased to see how athletic he looked, Alec Ayamanor out of Stanford. If you want to see, what he can potentially be, go watch the tape in 2023 against Colorado because he absolutely torched Travis Hunter. And I don't expect that to, be the case, but 4.44 for Alec Ayamanor at his size is excellent. And I thought that showed up on tape. He's a big physical guy. He can be a potential X receiver. And for the Patriots, I think that's exactly what you need to go get Drake May. You get him, a really talented offensive lineman in Armand Membu in the first round, Alec Ayamanor in the second. Both look very athletic, can do their jobs really effectively and help out your franchise quarterback. I think this would be a good draft for the Patriots, even if maybe the consensus wouldn't agree. At number 39 for the Chicago Bears, going to go ahead and take another guy who looked great at the combine, and that is offensive lineman. Where is he at? It's Donovan Jackson. I believe he's listed as an offensive tackle here. I think he's most likely going to be a guard, but he moved really smoothly. And he's somebody that I think, absolutely could play tackle in a pinch, but I think, right now, the interior of the offensive line is where the Bears really need help anyway. You get Ashton Genty and Donovan Jackson. I think that's an excellent draft for the Bears, even if, the fans might have really kind of thrown a fit about not taking an offensive lineman in the first round. Then at number 40 for the Saints, we had them taking Tyler Warren in the first. Going to go with Derek Harmon in the second round for the Saints here. You have Brian Brzee, but continuing to get, athletic guys on the interior of that defense, I think would be huge for this team. And, Harmon had a really good combine. He looked athletic. He's proven that he can rush the passer, led the entire college football landscape in pressures. He's definitely a guy who can be a disruptive force for a team that really, really needs it on that defensive line for the Saints. Then the Bears right back up here after taking Donovan Jackson. We are going to go with edge rusher Nick Scourton, who I think they're very pleased to get. Scourton's a guy who had a down season at Texas A&M, but was potentially seen as a top 10 pick in the way too early mock drafts coming out of Purdue before he transferred to Texas A&M. He had a bit of a down year, but I think that he could be a really good value in round 2. We saw that not a lot of guys produced very well in the Texas A&M defensive scheme, and so Scourton's a guy who maybe has his best football ahead of us, just wasn't placed in the best system to be successful, and I think pairing him with Sweat on the other side could give this Bears pass rush a little bit more juice going into this upcoming season. Then for the Jets at number 42, I did think about Jalen Milroe, but I think he looked too inconsistent. A lot of these other quarterbacks just looked too inconsistent during the combine, where I think teams are going to be hesitant to take them. But we'll see. There's a lot of quarterback needy teams. I am going to go with a corner, though, because they're likely losing Reed in free agency. This is very tough because these next 5 guys, Amos, Ravel, Porter, Thomas, and Morrison, I think all are really talented players. I'm going to go with Savon Revel out of East Carolina. He didn't get to test at the combine due to his injury that kept him out for most of the 2024 season, but he's big, athletic, physical. He can run man coverage. He's not quite as good as zone, but I think that he can be a really successful corner, and the best might be yet to come with him. He's definitely a swing because you don't have a lot of information recently on him, but he's a really talented player, and you could be getting fantastic value at number 42 here. Number 43 for the 49ers, going to go with Darius Alexander out of Toledo, getting Jahdae Barron and Alexander, two of the guys who have had some of the best draft processes so far. Alexander tore up the Senior Bowl, looked really good in that, looked good in the combine as well, proved that he was athletic. He is an older prospect, so you want him to come in and contribute right away, but I think that he can do that on this 49ers team and add to a pass rush that did take a major step back last year. They need to get nastier in the running game as well, and I think Alexander can help with that regard as well. Next up for the Cowboys, you could definitely take running back, but I think this running back class is so deep and so good. Getting a guy like Tyreek Williams to be that run stuffer up in the middle of that defense. Mozzie Smith just hasn't worked out in that role. Tyreek Williams he looked ridiculously smooth for his size. He's just a ridiculous run stuffer. He regularly takes on double teams. He holds up against the point of attack really, really well. I think he's just a monster, and if he slides to the middle of round 2, I think, this draft is really weird because the top is not overly strong, but I think by pick 7 or 8, you're getting a really good kind of similar value of player at like 10 as you are at like 44. And so it's going to be a lot of preference. I think there's going to be a lot of variety in how these players end up going, but getting a guy like Tyreek Williams at 44 is excellent value for this Cowboys team at a big position of need as well. Then for the Colts at number 45, we had them taking Nick Emmanwori, Combine Warrior, up at number 14. Going to go back to the defensive back and take Trey Amos out of Mississippi. He is a big physical guy who I think could even sneak into the back end of round 1, but again, it's really hard to kind of figure out what these corners are going to be doing. I think that, he plays well in off zone. He's a very scheme versatile type of player. And that's exactly what Lou Anarumo, the new defensive coordinator for the Colts, really preaches. It's a lot about young defensive backs taking on big responsibilities. And, he was a defensive backs coach before he became the defensive coordinator for the Bengals. He puts a lot of emphasis into defensive backs. And so Nick Emmanwori, Trey Amos, that's a great start to really improving the back end of this defense. Then for the Falcons, we have them taking Mike Green in the first. I'm going to go with Darian Porter, another corner. It's going to be kind of that run on corners. Porter looked ridiculously athletic for how big he is. He's got length. He's really tall. He doesn't have a ton of tape. Was like a fifth-year player that really just got to start for the first time. Ran a 4.30. So, the physical traits, the length, and the athleticism, it's all there. So I think there's going to be a team that takes swing on him early. Maybe even at the back end of round 1. I keep saying that for a ton of players, but, there's this big, giant chunk of guys that I think, could go in very similar places. But Porter here at number 46 to the Falcons. Then at number 47 for the Cardinals, I am going to go ahead and have them taking TJ Sanders out of South Carolina. He's a nice penetrating type of guy. I think that he could play kind of that 4-eye type of role, that 3-4 defensive end role for them. I think he fits best potentially as a 4-3, 3 tech, but I think that Jonathan Gannon is really creative with how he schemes up his defenses, and I think he could use a guy like Sanders to rush the passer. They need help on the interior of this defensive line, and Sanders is a really, really good talent to be getting here at number 47. At number 48 for the Miami Dolphins, we had them taking Kelvin Banks in the first round. They need safety help. Javon Holland's a free agent. Jordan Poyer, not the same player he has been, and I believe he's a free agent as well. So we're going to go with Xavier Watts out of Notre Dame. He's a very instinctual type of player. He had a ton of ball production this year. I think he can man up tight ends. He has great instincts. He's somebody that, again, middle of the second round is a really good value at a big position of need for this Dolphins team. Next up for the Bengals at number 49, we had them taking cornerback Will Johnson in the first. And another guy who I really like, who I'm going to be higher on than consensus, I think could be a guy they are interested in Omar Norman-Lott out of Tennessee. He is a pass rusher from the interior, and I think he can hold up against the run. He weighed in, much later than he was listed at Tennessee, but I think he is a guy who, at times showed that he can stop the run. But really, the Bengals had nobody getting after the passer besides Trey Hendrickson, and Omar Norman-Lott can do that from the interior. Tennessee was kind of on a weird rotation with how they played a lot of their pass rushers. But when he was out there, he led the nation in pass rush win rate, and he was just incredibly effective as a pass rusher. And I think the Bengals need to have a lot more of that from the interior. Considered guys like Tate Ratledge and some of the interior players as well, but decided to go with Norman Lott here at number 49. Next up at number 50 for the Seattle Seahawks, had them taking Jahad Campbell in the first round. I do think they need to go to the interior offensive line well now. Jared Wilson, who is a center, I think absolutely has played himself into the second round conversation. Ran a 4.84 40-yard dash out of Georgia. He moves incredibly well, climbs to the second level. He looks very athletic. And for a scheme that I think could continue to really lean into the outside zone with Kenneth Walker, I think that Jared Wilson is just the perfect type of player for that. And I really like him here at number 50. Also, the draft order for the next couple was all out of whack, so I traded them to the correct picks. So just ignore that, it was via Tampa Bay here for the Denver Broncos, who are now up on the clock. I'm going to go with Jack Besh out of TCU. Had a great Senior Bowl. He's somebody that, I think he's just very reliable. You know exactly what you're getting. He's maybe not the most dynamic athlete, but he's really strong at the catch point, is tough to tackle, blocks really well. He just has great hands. I just think he's the kind of guy that you really love giving your young quarterback. Bo Nix can rely on Besh and Cortland Sutton to be just reliable playmakers for him, and I think that could be really, really nice. Pairing him with Marion Hampton, that offense definitely got much scarier and much more dynamic as well. Next up at 52, Azareye'h Thomas out of Florida State. He is somebody that I think really fits perfectly with what this team wants. He's kind of that physical press man type of corner. He's really young. Pairing him with Joey Porter Jr. would just make it really, really tough for guys to even get off the line of scrimmage. I think that he would be an excellent second-round pick. Getting him and Matthew Golden would be a really, really fun start of the draft for the Steelers. And then at number 53 for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I went back to the corner well. Once again, it's just such a really, really good group kind of in this middle of the second round. And I'm going to take Benjamin Morrison out of Notre Dame. I'm very curious to see what happens with Morrison. I think, there's a world where he gets picked like 14th overall. Or he could slip really far because of this hip injury. Didn't get a chance to test. He's not going to be able to go at his pro day likely as well. So we'll see with him. I think that, hip flexibility and swivel is important for corners. But at this point in the draft, you have some guys in this room for Tampa Bay, but he is a really talented player that you might be getting a significant discount on because of the injury. I think it's worth the risk at this point for the Buccaneers to take him at number 53. Next for the Packers at number 54, we had them taking Luther Burden in the first. I'm going to go with a guy who definitely, I think, showed some athleticism that maybe wasn't super expected, was Landon Jackson out of Arkansas. Really explosive in his jumps, 40.5-inch vertical, the best of any defensive end, even better than Shemar Stewart. His broad jump was excellent as well, 10 foot, 9-inch. He was fantastic. He looked really athletic. He looked powerful. He's somebody that, I could see going much higher than this, but he fits the Packers' thresholds and scheme really well. He's kind of that big power rusher that gives you some athleticism. I think they'd be stoked to get him at number 54. Then the Chargers at number 55. We had them taking Colston Loveland in the first round. We're going to go ahead and add to the trenches here, as Jim Harbaugh you would expect him to do. Going to take Alfred Collins out of Texas. Ridiculously long arms. Moves pretty well at his size as well. I think that he would be a rock in the middle of that defense that definitely needs to get a bit stronger. So I like that pick for the Chargers there. Then at number 56 for the Buffalo Bills, there's definitely some uncertainty about Hook and what he might command on the open market. I'm going to take Travion Henderson for the Bills here. He's a really good pass catching back, which I think is exactly what they would want. There's other guys on the board, Cam Scatterby, Caleb Johnson, who might be better pure rushers, but for what the Bills need, they need a guy who can step up and be willing in pass protection, can go out on routes and, explode for big gains, and, has an ability to hit a cut and burst up the seam. I think Henderson absolutely has the ability to do that, and I think he is a really good scheme fit for them at 56. And then at number 57 for the Panthers, go ahead and go get Bryce Young another weapon. Yes, you could add to the defense. You could take Princely Amanbiela and Shemar Turner. There's other defensive guys on the board here, but I like going and adding Jaden Higgins out of Iowa State, who ran really well for his size, looked athletic. He had a good Senior Bowl week as well. I think that he is somebody that could definitely be a really good value at 57 here for the Panthers. You have Adam Thielen, you have some other guys in that room along with Xavier Legette, but I think you could continue to look for more pieces for Bryce Young, and Higgins could be a really interesting one for them. At 58 for the Texans, going to go with Shemar Stewart out of Texas A&M. I think he is somebody that is really athletic. Didn't test at the combine, but I think he, definitely has a lot of the raw tools that you look for, that he could potentially be a really nice player. D'Amico Ryans, you could, get him to really coach him up and be a really good interior presence for this Texans team after, kind of solidifying the interior of the offensive line in the first round. Then at number 59 for the Ravens, going to take Nick Emmanwori out of Ole Miss. He did definitely have a little bit more of a disappointing combine, but when it comes to his production and a lot of things that he was able to do at Ole Miss, you can't scoff at it. It's still definitely impressive. This Ravens team needs to add to the pass rush and get better in that area. So Emmanwori, I do think, makes sense for them at number 59. Then at number 60 for the Detroit Lions, I'm going to take a guy who I do think had a rough combine and he didn't even participate in it, Jack Sawyer out of Ohio State. I think teams are really going to like his character, his effort, his motor, his production, how he showed up in the biggest moments, but he has really, really short arms. And I think that pushes him from maybe a late first, early second round type of player to probably more of a late round 2, early day 3, something like that kind of player. And I think that the Lions really, I've picked him to the Lions to go in the first round many times before. And I think that they could potentially get him in the second round and be really, really happy with that. He fits the culture really well. And I think that Dan Campbell would want him definitely on his team. Number 61 for the Commanders, going to go with a tackle. We had them take James Pierce Jr. in the first round. Going to go Cam Williams out of Texas in the second. Played right tackle for Texas. Definitely inconsistent at times, but he's young. He definitely has some power in his profile as well. And I think that, protecting Jaden Daniels and upgrading the offensive line should definitely be a big-time priority for this team. And I think Williams would be, a high upside swing at that at 61. At number 62 for the Bills, going to go with Demetrius Knight out of South Carolina. Is a bit older, but he's somebody that definitely can fly around, has good instincts, make plays. Matt Milano's not getting any younger. You don't have a lot in that linebacker room behind him. So getting somebody like Knight, when you already have, Travion Henderson and Walter Nolan in this draft, I think, that's a really solid, well-rounded draft. Number 63 for the Kansas City Chiefs, decided to go running back because, I think they can upgrade that room. Pacheco's been dealing with some injuries. They haven't been great in that area. And Cam Skattebo definitely seems like a Kansas City Chief to me, but Caleb Johnson, even despite the poor 40 time, I was really interested in him. But I just kept coming back to Cam Skattebo. Caleb Johnson falling out of the second round here is kind of tough, but Cam Skattebo, I think he just fits that, hard-nosed, they just want to run someone over type of play style. He's kind of more of that, he can make plays in the receiving game as well. He can step up in pass protection. I think he just fits the style of what Kansas City likes in a running back really well. At number 64 for the Philadelphia Eagles, decided to go with an offensive lineman. Howie Roseman said he's obsessed with offensive linemen. Wyatt Milam's interesting, but I'm going to go with Marcus Mbow out of Purdue. He is somebody that has good athleticism, might have to kick into the interior. He played right tackle for Purdue, but I think that he's most likely going to be an interior player, and I think he could be, a really interesting developmental type player and somebody that they could definitely use after most likely they're going to lose Mekhi Becton in free agency. So that's going to do it for this 2025 post-combine NFL mock draft. Let me know in the comments down below who you want your favorite team to take, maybe what I got right in this mock draft, what I got wrong. Would love to hear it from you. While you're down there, please hit that like button. That just is a free and easy way to help support the channel. I truly do appreciate it. Hit the subscribe button as well. You won't want to miss all the NFL draft content coming to you over the next few weeks. Thank you so much for watching. I will catch you in the next one.